Welcome to the latest episode of KapVista Klips. Today we are with Stefan from DermR. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me and
Awesome.
giving me the opportunity to
Now,
talk about us.
I want to get into what you're doing. I want to find out more about DermR, but I want to understand you. I want to understand your background, your experience, what got you to this point, because a lot of times that is glossed over and people don't understand what experience founders bring to this role. So tell me about you. Tell me how you got to this point. Tell me, your background. Yeah.
Got it. My origin story. All right. Well, look, it's a very, very interesting one. I mean, look, you're right. Like we did not come into this with this business being so polished, and I think it took a lot of my experience over 15, 20 years to get to where we are. But look, if we talk about where I've come from, I mean, 15 years ago, what many people don't know is that I actually pioneered the direct-to-consumer skin genomics industry. This was back in the day when 23andMe just started with diseases. We focused on skin health. I spent 3 years doing this as a research project and turned it into a very successful business. Flash forward to today, and that technology represents about 60% of all skin genomic tests worldwide. Part of our business model through this approach has been to work with skincare brands. So we've worked with companies like Rationale, O Cosmetics, Synergy. Vanessa Hudson's even had a skincare brand called No Beauty in America, where we did a DNA test for her. We've had insights into CVS Pharmacy, even other international markets in Dubai, Qatar, and China. So we've been quite fortunate to really understand not only the direct-to-consumer skin genomics industry, but how customers can interact with something so technical. Along this whole journey, I think I've always been that outlier who's just always had the ability to self-start things. So while I was doing this DNA test as a research project, I also had a cosmetic clinic. So we were doing Botox fillers, laser treatments, and we actually had a lab where we could actually have a customer come in. They could take their DNA sample. We could figure out how their skin was aging and apply treatment modalities based on the science that around the test. And we created a whole unique customer experience. And this is something that, I'm very proud of. Like 15 years of my life went to building up this industry. And it's very weird to be credited as like the grandfather of this industry, despite being so young. But what's been really interesting is seeing how other companies in this space have sort of grown and failed. And we've been watching them very carefully. I mean, the latest one is 23andMe, $1 billion, and they can't get it to work. And fundamentally, throughout this time, we found a business model that worked, which was working with actual skincare companies. But what we found is that, from a DNA testing perspective, the client acquisition cost is incredibly high. I mean, most DNA tests, it's a one-time test, with the exception of like pregnancy tests and stuff. They're all one-time tests, which means you could spend $200 or $300 trying to acquire a customer, and you'll never see them again. And so one of the elements that stuck to me in terms of growing this business is how can we get customers to keep coming back? Now, in my particular industry about skin aging, we were able to identify gene markers that are associated with skin aging and develop algorithms that can let you know what skincare ingredients are going to be right for you and match them to any skincare brand. But fundamentally, I think people wanted to know in real time, how do I know if this is working? Now, throughout this time, the only way to figure it out is to actually be able to collect live tissue. And in the cosmetic space, nobody wants to do anything that involves cutting just to figure out if a skincare product is working. And realistically, that's kind of all that existed, which was a biopsy. There was no other way to collect live tissue. And so I set out to develop a way to collect another way of collecting live tissue that wasn't a biopsy. Now, little did I know at the time, it never existed. And so we spent years figuring out a manufacturing pathway that could not only scale our solution, but could also be affordable and easy to use. And we're quite successful getting a lot of exposure in the beauty space because effectively we were able to create a microsampling solution that could collect live tissue that could then be tested and analyzed in real time and be used to figure out A, what products should be working, and B, have another way to collect in the future to measure the gene expression profiles at day 0 versus day 30. So we did get a lot of exposure. And throughout that time of developing this solution, you've got what's happening on my personal side, which is what my mum was going through. So my mother has Mauritian skin, beautiful olive skin. And for about 12 months, she had this small pimple that kept coming and going on the side of her nose. And she'd come to me and she'd say, look, I've got this thing on the side of my nose. What should I do? And I dismissed it. It was a very, very weird thing just to dismiss, because you just look at it and you're like, it's just a pimple. And it just kept coming back. And eventually, it got to a point where she did have concerns and, she wanted to see a doctor. But at the same time, her background and how she grew up, she had that phobia of seeing a doctor, because generally a doctor requires pain or cutting or for a dentist pulling a tooth out for a cavity. Eventually, she did go to see the doctors, and she had to go get a biopsy. And unfortunately, the doctor got it wrong, and she had to get a second biopsy. And it turned out to be a very aggressive BCC, so a basal cell carcinoma. And I think at that point, believe it or not, being in Australia is the first time I've generally been had any sort of experience around skin cancer. So it was very new at the time, and I never really understood the toll it takes, like something so simple as BCC. And so in order to remove the lesion, she had to undergo what's called Mohs surgery. And Mohs surgery is when it's a surgical procedure where the surgeon will cut around the lesion, and you have to sit there and wait. And they'll send the sample off to histopathology, and they'll wait to get clearance to make sure that all the cancerous tissue has been removed. And if it hasn't been removed, the surgeon goes back in, cuts a larger diameter around the area, and they keep repeating this until the sample comes back as all clear. And so after this procedure, she ended up losing cartilage around her nose. She then had to get reconstruction surgery, and ultimately she developed sleep apnea, which affects her for the rest of her life. All of this from a tiny pimple on the side of her nose. And it was one of those moments where, until it actually hits home, you really don't understand the impact that skin cancer has. And I know when experiencing that, not only did I have guilt because I dismissed it, which a lot of people would dismiss, but at that moment, I completely pivoted. I'm like, what are the odds that somebody like me is working on a way to collect live tissue that can be applied to so many other things, and your mother actually has a skin cancer that she put off because she had a fear of needles. And it was that moment that I completely pivoted and went down the skin cancer path. It was quite interesting because I thought like what my mother experienced was nobody else has gone through it. And the more I looked into it, I went down a very, very deep rabbit hole. And, we started piecing together data and all these data sets, and started to create a very interesting story. And, we found out that, there is no other way to diagnose skin cancer. We found out that over 40% of skin cancer biopsies are benign and could have been avoided. For context, that was over 600,000 avoidable biopsies that were performed in Australia just last year, which cost the healthcare system over $400 million. And this is not only isolated to Australia. I mean, skin cancer, as it turns out, is the leading cancer globally, and it's choking up every single healthcare system. And we started to piece it more and more together, and we found out that we're really onto something that can potentially have a huge impact. And at that time, we're talking to all these institutions and universities, and people are asking, who are you affiliated with? How are you getting this to market? And the reality is, like, we didn't have anybody. Like, I literally pivoted as a startup, and I just moved forward to take this product to market purely based on our mission, and honestly wanted to help my mum with her never having to experience what she went through again.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very interesting story. And even through the back of all of this, I wanted to understand the genomic landscape of just a genetic lab. So I opened up a lab. We still have it today. So I was able to understand how genetic testing works, how to keep everything quite affordable. Through the skin aging space, I was able to develop educational tools, and I trained thousands of cosmetic clinicians and estheticians around skin aging and genetics. So, like my whole life has always been around skin aging, and I never thought I'd be into the cancer space, but it really took me all of these moments in life to get to where I am. And to get to this point, I even sat through like a medtech actuator course to really understand how to get this product to market. So it's been quite an interesting journey. We've done this in a very, very lean way. But I've sort of just been going under the radar. Most of it's been through stealth mode, other than like the last year. And so we've sort of just popped up, and people are like,
Yeah.
where have you come from and who are you working with? And this is sort of where we're at today. It's an interesting journey.
Tell me, what is DermR? So what's the product? Tell me.
So look, we're two things. So number one is we've developed a microsampling tool using a microneedle technology. So we've developed a unique way of manufacturing microneedles that are actually barbed. So there's a lot of research right now in the microneedle space, all for like vaccines. So it's all about putting things into the body. And believe it or not, I've learned that's the actually easiest thing to do, because we've got the opposite. And so what we've done is we've created a way to, once the needles are inserted into the skin, upon extraction, they collect a small tissue sample that can be sent off for genetic testing. So we've actually developed a cost-effective, scalable way to make this, which nobody in the world has ever been able to do. And that's number one. Number two is that we've developed a companion diagnostic that can screen against the spectrum of skin cancers, including melanoma, and be used as a triage tool. So I mentioned that 40% of biopsies are benign and could be avoided. So we could actually use this instead of a biopsy to figure out if actually this lesion is cancerous. And if it is cancerous, you then get that excision or get it removed. But if it's not cancerous, like 40% of the cases, you don't need that biopsy. And the way I sort of like to think of it is, 15, 20 years ago, you had the big push for the BRCA test, which is the breast cancer genetic test. We're doing that for skin cancer. So we have where we're putting a patent on a gene signature that can be licensed to any pathology provider, and they can perform this test. And so the only way to use this test is through a microsampling solution, being the DermR Patch. So that's effectively what we are right now. But there are so many other avenues that we can go with this, because effectively we have a microsampling tool that can collect live tissue suitable for gene sequencing across hundreds of other diseases around skin health. So this opens up the area to countless possibilities.
Perfect. And so tell me about some of the milestones that you've achieved, since pivoting.
Yeah, look. So since pivoting, it's been a lot has happened. As a startup, number one, our job is designed to be lean. But look, one of the most interesting things was we were fortunate to be part of the Western Australian Pilbara Challenge. Basically, it was a program supported by WA Department of Health and Minister Stephen Dawson, where they selected 10 companies to fast track a proof of concept that could help reimagine rural and remote healthcare. So what we learned was, going into the Pilbara, there are no dermatologists. There's like one there once every 2 months, and there's a 1,300-day wait time to see a dermatologist. At the same time, skin cancer rates are highest in regional areas. So there's like a really, really big disconnect. But over that time, we were ingrained in the public healthcare system. We understood clinical workflows. We developed clinical protocols. We got full HREC approval, and we completed our first clinical trial as of last year, which validated an entirely new way to diagnose skin cancer. Now, we did this completely on our own, mostly bootstrapped and self-funded. And it was at that point that really put us on the map around a new, novel way of doing something. What was really interesting, though, is that we also had a lot of boxes to tick along the way, because fundamentally, it's great having a new technology. I mean, it's wonderful. You've got a new way of doing something. It's great. But some of the things that we had to answer was, who are we taking money away from? And that was a challenge, because fundamentally, pathologists do biopsies. So throughout the time, we had to really explore the biopsy market space, see what was actually happening, what are the bottlenecks, what are the hurdles. And speaking to pathology providers around the world, we learned that there are backlogs in biopsy testing because it is so manual, it's expensive, and there's a lot of human error because there's a lot of manual handling. And so our solution is to work with pathology, and we've developed a PCR approach, which is so it's like the COVID test. So all pathology did COVID testing, which was a qPCR test. Our workflow uses that methodology as opposed to the current biopsy approach. And how that works with pathology is that they've got all this infrastructure that they've invested in COVID, which now they're generally not using. And we've got a way of tapping into those resources. The other thing that we had to figure out was, what was the reimbursement model? And while we identified 5 really, really interesting viable reimbursement models, the easiest one to market is we were able to identify existing billable Medicare item numbers to ensure that we can actually roll this out quite quickly. Now, in terms of like other milestones, I mean, over the last year, it was all about learning the business model, trying to get this to market, and getting our story right. Now, we were fortunate to be featured on Sunrise. We're quite vocal about it. Actually, we said at the beginning that we're part of the Pilbara Challenge and we're going to do a clinical trial. And we announced this on Sunrise, and 12 months later, we're fortunate to come back to Sunrise and say, this is exactly what we've done. This is what we've achieved. We also won last year the Australian Technologies Competition Biotech of the Year. Now, that particular award was not about the product, but it was about the business model and our go-to-market strategy. So I can proudly say we have an award-winning go-to-market strategy. We were also fortunate to win South by Southwest Sydney Grand Pitch grand final event for our pitch, which has been phenomenal. Over the time we've received support from skin cancer foundations. We've got letters of support from ministers. We've got a lot of people that are fundamentally backing our journey. And I think what's been quite interesting is that we've been doing this without any affiliations. We've sort of just, we've got a business focus. I appreciate that there is science everywhere. And I have that innate ability to translate quite quickly. As much as I want to go down the R&D journey, I want to get this to market, and I know exactly what needs to happen to get there. And I think that's why people are really starting to watch us, because we're not fiddling around R&D. We have these goals that have to be met to get to market. There's been quite a lot in the last year, but we've got a lot of traction moving forward.
You're obviously raising capital. Tell us about the capital raise. What's the funds being used for? What's the timeline? That sort of thing.
Okay, so look, ultimately what we're looking to raise is $5 million to get us to market. Now, in terms of what that's going to be used toward, we've basically got 3 clinical trials that are required to get to regulatory submission. So we've completed 1. We've completed the first in-human clinical trial. We've validated it. We know it works. We still need these 2 trials, which is a pilot and a pivotal, in order to tick that box to get the TGA approval and FDA approval. So with the funding, we're looking to ideally get this released in trenches based on milestones. The first milestone is to have that pilot clinical trial along with our design freeze for the microneedle patch. After that, we then have some patent submissions, because we will then be able to submit a patent for that gene signature, like the breast cancer test, so it'd be skin cancer. And then that would allow us to then go toward the pivotal clinical trial, which is the one where it gets released to a few sites. And based on that, we'll have all that information to submit for regulatory submission. I think from one of the reasons why we wanted this released in trenches instead of a lump sum is because I think investors, it works both ways. It's all about de-risking. And I think for us, we have a lot to prove in order to de-risk everything. But I think for us, the hardest part is done, where we've got HREC approval. We were able to validate our solution worked independently. And now for us, it's more about just ticking those boxes. And we're working with some of the best people in Australia to help us get there.
So you're raising $5 million. You're de-risking it as much as possible. So it's a 2-year pathway to commercialization?
So in order to get commercialization, we're looking at about between a 2.5 to 3 year journey. So the next 12 months, 12 to 18 months, it's all about that pilot trial. We then have the pivotal trial, which is about 6 to 7 months. That will give us enough for regulatory submission. And then that regulatory process is about 6 months. So we're looking between 2.5 years to 3 years. But once we get that approved, we're already talking to customers. We already have a couple of customers who are quite interested, and we're already talking with pathology who are interested. So our goal is not only to get to regulatory submission, but even before then, to have those customers on board, ready to go.
This is not just an Australian problem you're solving. This is a global problem. So once you are in market, Australia has some of the hardest regulation, to get approved by. So if you can get it regulated in Australia and approved in Australia, then it's pretty much an open door for the rest of the world.
That's it. I mean, look, one of our strategies, so we've got a full regulatory strategy, so we know the markets that we want to go into. The way that we sort of foresee this is we're doing the FDA and TG in parallel. So we know that a lot of what we're doing in Australia can be translated to FDA as well. So we are working with some consultants.
Yep.
We don't want to do one at a time. And with some of the customers that we're talking to, they're also encouraging us to do the parallel because there are some strategic things in play here.
The story's quite interesting, and I love your story because you've come from something that you've known, you've been in part of for 15 years. You've got that personal element with your mother. You've pivoted. You've found a realistic, like a need for this. It's not just a want; it's a need. This is something that if investors are trying to compare. Beauty industry is a want. Medical industry is a need. This is something that needs to there needs to be a solution, right? And the remote, the problems that you're solving, especially in the remote communities where skin cancer is high, they don't have access to it. This is not just an Australian, but it's a global issue. So this is something that needs to happen. You need to get to the market, and there is a lot of support around you. So I think from an investor point of view, this is something that the hard part, like you said, the hard part's already done. It's just now going through the motions to get regulatory approval.
I mean, that's it. And look, there is nothing else on the market that is similar to us. I mean, there are apps, there's mole mapping software, there's AI coming, there's all these things that are designed to help highlight if there is a lesion of concern. Fundamentally, they cannot diagnose. You still, at the end of the day, need a sample to determine if it is cancer. And this is where we actually fit in. And we're actually working with MoleMap for our next clinical trial because they see this as the next viable step. One of the issues that they have is that they're a nurse-run model who do mole mapping. And once they find a lesion of concern, they have to send them out of their business to a doctor. They see this as a way of keeping them within their clinics to figure out if that lesion is cancerous before actually sending them away. So we really think we've found a unique opportunity that even AI won't be able to step in and take over. Because we can't.
Okay, so this is something that if you're interested in the space, or if you have any sort of personal connection from putting my investor hat on, if you've got any sort of personal connection, you've known anybody that's gone down the path of being diagnosed with skin cancer, or even going down the path of taking a biopsy and checking your moles and checking your skin and things like that, this is a solution that you will understand straight away because you've been through the process. Now, from a global investment point of view, this is something that is not just Australian focused, it is global focused, and you are making the right steps of doing all the regulatory steps at the same time. If anybody who's watching this episode that wants to know more, reach out to my team. We can connect you directly through to Stefan to have a conversation, find out more about the actual technology and the investment opportunity, because I think this is something that's needed. There's other other things in the market that are nice and do great things, but this is needed because skin cancer is it's dangerous. So reach out to my team. We'll connect you through to Stefan. It's something you have to you have to get behind. From a personal point of view, I've gone and get my skin checked a few times, and yeah, this is something that will make my life easy. But also the people don't realize that they need to get checked. This is something that will make them think about it, right? So the commercial aspect of it is huge.
Yeah, I agree. If I were to add sort of one more thing to it about the market,
Yeah.
is that currently only doctors can do biopsies. Now we've spoken to like the unions of doctors in Australia, and by 2030 there is going to be a 25% decrease in GPs, a 30% increase in skin cancer. So there's fundamentally a numbers problem happening, not just in Australia but also around the world. And everybody's focusing on trying to upskill doctors, whereas we have a solution that allows nurses and allied health to be able to perform a biopsy-equivalent diagnostic test for the first time. And we've proven this through our clinical trials. So we've actually got this thing that, we have a big issue that's coming, and we've actually got a solution right now that we're working on that can fundamentally address this and also allow other people to perform testing.
I'm gonna leave it at that. Thank you very much for jumping on with us. It's been great to chat. Again, anybody who's watching this episode who wants to find out more, please reach out to my team and we'll connect you straight away. But thanks for jumping on. It's great, and I want to find out more.